quiet.
I am. Louder. Louder.
What's your name?
Louder. 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 Okay, now listen. Listen, y'all love me?
Love you.
Okay, Mama, I love you more. This is the NAACP rocking with me. Al Sharpton, we're going to shell out. We're going to do coliseums for Stefan. We're going to do libraries. We're going to do resources centers. We're going to like Stefan is going to live for generations to generations to generations to generations. The Clark family will never die.
The Reverend Al Sharpton blasting the response from the White House that the deadly police shootings across the country were local matters. So let's start there. Angela Rye is with me, CNN political commentator and former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus. Ken Cuccinelli is with us, CNN legal and political commentator. And Ken, let me just begin with you. You know, off of what we heard from the White House yesterday, this is a local matter, it should be handled by local authorities. Listen, we know that this is a national issue, but if you can put the legal issues aside, you know, isn't it a moral issue? I mean, don't you risk an answer, like we heard from Sarah Sanders at the briefing yesterday, that sounds dismissive?
There's no question that while technically true, that overwhelmingly the management, even in these situations that are tragic with someone shot and killed, of police departments and sheriff's departments is local and state. The federal government has a role. They have a civil rights role for one, and they have a potential role of sort of putting together best practices and trying to move them around the country. But to sound that dismissive from the podium wasn't smart. It wasn't wise, and it wasn't very compassionate, of course. But as a practical matter, the responsibility for dealing with police departments and any bad actions by police is overwhelmingly local and state.
Angela, how do you see it?
Well, I see that Barack Obama and his administration had a far more effective response to decades and centuries of police violence. Barack Obama in December 2014 issued Executive Order 13684, which was a task force, setting up a task force on 21st century policing, their last report coming out in the middle of 2015, where they went into the field to talk to local communities who had been impacted locally by people dying who looked just like them locally. But there was a federal response. There was a Department of Justice, not a Department of Injustice, that looked into every single one of these brutal deaths that were suffered at the hands of police violence. So when Donald Trump's administration says that it's a local issue, I would just read back some names. There in Illinois, we had Laquan McDonald and Rekia Boyd. In Texas, we had Sandra Bland. In Ohio, we had 12-year-old Tamir Rice and John Crawford. In New York, we had Eric Garner, Sean Bell, Akai Gurley, Amadou Diallo. In Michigan, we had 7-year-old Ayanna Jones. In Maryland, we had Freddie Gray. In North Carolina, we had Jonathan Farrell. In South Carolina, we had Walter Scott. In California, we had Ezell Ford and most recently Stefan Clark. In my home state of Washington, Charlena Lyles, and that is just a sampling of how this is not a local issue. It is a national disaster. It is a national problem. It's reminiscent of everything that Black and brown people have experienced with law enforcement since the beginning of their establishment. It is a national problem.
So given the list and agreeing it is a national issue, why, when we look, Ken, at what the president chooses to wade into issues, right? He weighs in on the national anthem and taking a knee. Why not take a stand on Black and brown people in this country being killed by police?
Well, first of all, the question to Sarah Sanders was about the Sacramento shooting of Stefan Clark. There were 2 police officers involved. One was white, one was black. Yeah, that's right, and that's true. And one was white, one was black. You mentioned Baltimore and Freddie Gray. The police officers were black and white. I mean, they were responding to what they perceived. Let me finish, please. They were responding to what they perceived as the threat, not responding to the race of the victim.
Can I respond to this, Brooke, just momentarily? Not one time in my list, not one time in my comments about Barack Obama establishing an executive order and a task force to look into police violence have I brought up the race of officers. Here's the challenge that we have with systemic oppression and systemic racism, it doesn't matter who the immediate actor is. It's about how they are trained to perceive Black people. That is the problem. So when your initial framework for establishing law enforcement and their engagement with people of color in this country is to hunt down and return to their masters, runaway slaves, that is the paradigm. You see Black people as inherently violent and criminal in all of your actions going forward centuries later. That paradigm has yet to shift, and it is incumbent upon responsible citizens in this country. We would hope that that would start with the commander-in-chief in saying, we know that there is a problem in the ways in which law enforcement interacts with certain people. There are those who we are there to protect and serve, and there are those who we are prepared to shoot and to kill. That is a problem with the framework, and it has to change.
Quick response, Ken.
Yeah, that's just not right.
It's accurate.
That assumes a way. It's totally illogical. It says it doesn't matter that one of the shooting officers was Black. It's still a racist incident against Black people in general, and that just defies logic.
Have you looked at the data?
And we
it doesn't defy logic. Racism actually defies logic. So then you should see that disproportionately Black people are killed by the police.
I haven't interrupted you yet. Can I please finish?
I interrupted you twice to correct you.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And you were wrong. So the Washington Post set up a database that, okay, that's 4 interruptions. The Washington Post set up a database to track police shootings in the last couple of years. And one of the things they have found is that the overwhelming proportion of people shot by police are white, not surprisingly. But about 26% have been Black. And about,
which is disproportionate.
75%. So it is disproportionate to the population, double.
That's
but it's
right.
Lower than the proportion of arrests. And I would also note that this year, 2018, so far there have been 18 police officers shot and killed. It's not a big data pool, but so far 9 of those 16 were shot by Black offenders.
Okay, so again, it's the interactions with the criminal justice system. Have you also looked into the numbers of people who have been shot and killed by police? You brought up the 18 officers. What about the thousands of people who've been shot and killed by the police this year? We are disproportionately Black. We are disproportionately brown. I know, but you should. It's really important how we frame our data. We have a responsibility in the news to report things accurately and to be fair. So what I'm telling you about systemic racism, whether your mind rejects it or not, is that it doesn't matter who the actor is. Systemic. So now we're talking over each other. And so you may not count it as an interruption, but I do. The fact of the matter is, as defensive as we might be, as in our feelings as we might be, these are the facts, and they hurt, and they have to be challenged from the foundation of this country. Ken, it's a problem.